Hi, and thank you for showing up. When we got the question to speak at this event, we elaborated around how can we make sure that these 40 minutes are as valuable to you as possible. So we do not intend to have a traditional company presentation today. We will kindly ask our colleagues in the Scania booth, and we have a brilliant homepage. If you're curious about more sort of background information about Scania, you're most welcome to post them afterwards. So today we will focus on some selected food for thought and some examples that we believe can be valuable to you. And we really have a challenge here for us and for you, that we hope that each and every one of you will leave from here today with something that will be really valuable to you. So at least one thing per person, that's the intention. So please let us know in case you want to post questions afterwards. We're most willing to add on in case there is anything. But that's the challenge. And we kindly ask you to help us to watch out what would be really valuable to you in your unique situation. Because that's really the intention of this session, to have a focus on value and really challenge our definition of success. Are we really focusing on what matters most? My name is Paulina, and I have the pleasure of have been able to work with the combination of business and sustainability throughout my 17 years at Scania. I've done it both on a sort of Scania Group perspective, but also very close to business responsibility. And my role is basically to help business succeed and to maximize the value proposition, and doing so while welcoming aspects of nature and human needs into the decision forums to put planet and people next to profit. And I really appreciate being here today on Women in Tech for many reasons, but one of them is that tech is really an enabler for sustainability, a crucial one, and we really need to include multiple perspectives here. And I'm extra happy to be here with Elsa, because I know that Elsa is just as passionate about sustainability as I am. So I'm really looking forward to also hearing sort of your perspectives afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm Elsa, and I want to save the world. My biggest passion in life is connected to the climate challenge that we're in. And an important part for me is connected to the legacy that I leave behind. I want to be able to tell my future grandkids that I did everything possible to help solve the climate crisis that we're in. And I'm very fortunate because I love what I work with. And my ambition is to minimize the environmental footprint from the IT industry, but also help people understand the value of software and data in order to reach our climate targets. And I'm very happy to be here today with you and together with all of you, because we can only solve this crisis together.
Exactly, and it's also interesting that on stage we have perspective of data and circularity, and sort of combining different perspectives into this, we believe is crucial to do these step changes needed, because they are needed fast. So we need to collaborate and really nurture courage to do things we don't normally do or have really the comfort doing, and challenging the system. And basically this time in history is super interesting in the automotive industry, because right now we're in the midst of a massive shift. And it's actually a multi-dimensional shift. So several fundamental things are changing at the same time. And I can't miss out on that. It's super interesting to be a part of that and being inside this industry in this time in history. So, the heavy automotive industry is a traditional industry and has been steady for quite some time. But right now, it's really this tradition meeting high-speed innovation. Super interesting combination. And as a leader, we need to have the courage to define the road. And we need to drive the shift towards a sustainable transport system, together with partners, together with those who want the same thing.
Yeah. So what is our guiding star in this super exciting, multi-dimensional transformation that we're in? And Paulina mentioned it briefly. It's our vision and our purpose at Scania to drive the shift towards a sustainable transport system. And for me, drive the shift means being in the driving seat, being bold, being a leader, challenging our industry in terms of sustainability, daring to take risks, although we might not have all the answers, and daring to be the first one doing new things. So, many people would say that Scania is a heavy-duty vehicle manufacturer, but essentially what we are selling is a computer on wheels. Today, Scania has over 500,000 of connected vehicles. And gradually, Scania is becoming a software company. Soon, we'll actually have more software engineers than actual vehicle engineers. So in this transformation we're in, we need to understand what the need is in society in order to transport people and goods. So in the future, it's very likely that we will not only sell this computer on wheels, but it's very likely that we will provide transport solutions or transport as a service. And in order to make the right decisions and to understand what need of transport the society need, we need a lot of data. We need data in all types of shapes and sizes in order to make informed and the right decisions. So you might be wondering, why is this transformation important for Scania? And why do we have such a bold ambition to drive the shift? Well, everyone in this room, and essentially everyone in the world, we have one common roadmap. And it's a roadmap to secure a safe future for future generation. And it's what we recall as the carbon law to be able to reach the Paris Agreement. And it says that emissions will have to peak by 2020 at the latest. Then we have to halve our emissions every decade to eventually reach net zero by 2050. So, the Paris Agreement was signed almost 7 years ago in 2015. So you might be wondering, how are we doing? Well, actually in 2020, our emissions declined with approximately 5%. And this is the annual decline we have to see every year ahead until 2050 to be able to reach our net zero target. But unfortunately, this decline was due to the pandemic. Our societies were at a standstill. But during the pandemic, politicians and leaders were talking about the importance of a green recovery. But when our economy recovered in 2021, we actually increased our emissions. And in 2021, we actually reached an all-time high historic emissions in the world. And when looking at the action plans and our efforts to try to reach our Paris Agreement, it shows that we will probably not reach our target. So we are not on track. So what is our challenge? Well, I think this guy sums it up pretty well. So Albert Einstein said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So this means that we need to be innovative. We probably need to redefine and reinvent what success really is. And connected to today's topic on women in tech, we need to level up. But most importantly, we need people to challenge our thinking, challenge our companies, and challenge our industries. So let me tell you how I try to challenge the industry that I work in, the IT industry, in terms of sustainability. But what is really sustainable IT? When talking about it from a climate change perspective, I like to define it into two topics: greening with IT and green IT. And everyone in this room probably knows that digitalization plays a crucial part in transforming businesses and societies around the world. And digitalization has also been identified as a key enabler in order to reach our Paris Agreement target. This is what we refer to as greening with IT, how we utilize the power of software and data to lower emissions from other industries. A simple example of greening with IT at Scania is how we collect the data from our connected vehicles, we analyze the data, and then we help our customers optimize their running fleets and help them lower CO2 emissions. And experts says that if we utilize the power of software and data in the right way, we can help save 15% of the global CO2 emissions. And the fantastic thing is that we can start doing it tomorrow because we already have the data. However, digitalization and greening with IT has been the main focus area when talking about IT and sustainability. But what about the actual climate footprint from the IT industry itself? Before we jump into that, I'd like to ask you a little question. So please raise a hand if you've been flying in the past 3 months. I see a couple of hands. Thanks for sharing. And I have another question. Please raise a hand if you've been consuming IT in the past 24 hours. I see everyone's raising their hand. And this shows how integrated IT has become in our daily lives. And this is what I refer to as green IT when addressing to minimize the environmental footprint from the IT industry itself. Today, the IT industry accounts for around 5% of the global CO2 emissions, which is more than twice the amount of emissions of the aviation industry. So the reason I asked this question was not to put any blame on you, that you should feel ashamed for consuming IT, but it's more to challenge us working in the industry. We really need to level up. We need to work a lot more with transparency, awareness, but most importantly with lowering the environmental emissions from our industry. So now I have introduced the concept of green IT and greening with IT. So what is it that Scania and I'm doing in my daily work to address and challenge this industry? Well, then we need to dig in within the IT industry and focus on the data center industry. And the data center industry accounts for around 2% of global CO2 emissions, which is equivalent to the emissions of the aviation industry. And it's claimed to be the fastest growing industry in the world. In 2030, it's estimated that the data center industry alone will emit approximately 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. So it's very likely that the data center industry will surpass the heavy-duty vehicle industry in terms of emissions within this decade. So what can Scania do to challenge this industry? Well, Scania is financing a startup that I'm a part of, and we're called Gaia. So you might be wondering, how come Scania is financing a startup? Well, it started with a coworker of mine who felt that he wanted to understand how he could drive the shift in his daily work. And he felt that there was a disconnection between the software development community and sustainability. So he had an idea, and he gathered a team of 4, which I was a part of, and we brought this idea to the annual hackathon event at Scania in 2019. The idea got immediate support from higher management. Then the pandemic came, but in the past year, we've actually been working full-time on this idea, us four, in an entrepreneur program called Innovation Factory, which is very similar to like the Draknästet concept or the Shark Tank concept. So we went from a small idea to working full-time, and now we are on the journey of becoming an independent company financed by Scania, and we are scaling up as we speak. And I think this really shows how Scania is supporting innovation, asking their employees to think outside the box, but then also giving them the opportunity to try these ideas out. So Scania is really empowering and engaging their employees. So I'm sure some of you are curious to hear, what is it that you're actually doing in your startup? Well, the idea and the solution is very simple. We are measuring real-time CO2 emissions from cloud IT systems. So essentially what we want to do is empower software developers to understand how they can optimize for sustainability when building architecture, just like they do today when they optimize for security, uptime, performance, etc. But it's not only the developers that we want to empower. We also want to empower the end consumer, regular people like you and me. But how can we do that? Well, we want to provide a climate efficiency rating of digital services, sort of in a similar way as we do with appliances today. So if you go to the store to buy a dishwasher, you have an efficiency rating in front of you. And we want to do the same thing, but for digital services. So in the future, when you go to Netflix, Storytel, Spotify, HBO, Scania.com, or your online banking app, you will have this transparency in front of you. And so you can take data-driven decisions based on what digital services you want to consume. But in its core, we really want to empower and engage software developers to code green. But how can a software developer code green? Well, we have 3 general recommendations that we call the 3 Rs. It's relocation, right-sizing, and re-architecting. And relocation is based on the fact that 60% of the world's electricity today is generated from fossil fuels. So we want to encourage developers to move their workloads to regions that have a cleaner energy. Right-sizing is about only using whatever you need to get the job done and then turning off the things that you don't use. And re-architecting is about choosing the most appropriate architecture for your solution, and hopefully it's more energy efficient. One way could be to change maybe your programming language to a more efficient one. So what's the savings potential then? Well, we see a huge CO2 savings potential. We actually see that there's a savings potential between 50 to 95% of CO2 emissions per IT system. Imagine how much CO2 we could save in the world if every developer had the right tools and knowledge to understand how they could optimize for sustainability. But it also comes with a cost savings potential, which a lot of people like, saving costs. It comes with a savings potential of up to 15% of total cloud spend. So it's sort of a win-win-win, because we save CO2, we lower cost, but most importantly, we empower and engage a community on sustainability and how they can work with it on a daily basis. So let's look at some pilot teams at Scania who've been using this tool. Here we have actually a team, and I think this is a system that's supporting autonomous vehicles. So if you want to stay for the next session that starts at 2, then you hear more about the autonomous vehicles. But here we have a team who started right-sizing. So they only used whatever they needed to get the job done. So they started turning off their workloads on evenings and weekends. And they've saved more than, I think, 50–60% of CO2 emissions. And they got access to the tool in February this year. and have already made tremendous improvements. I know this tool doesn't look very fancy at the moment. We launched it in February, and we're still a startup, so we have just started our journey. Here we have another team so the green line represents CO2 emissions, and the orange line is electricity consumption. And here we see that this team made tremendous improvements in terms of CO2, but they also increased their cloud functionality. So they have made savings over 80% of CO2 emissions. So the point here that I want to make is we really need to work more with sustainable IT. We need to challenge the industry we're in and really strive to minimize the environmental footprint from the IT industry, or what I call green IT. But when working with green IT, we can never strive to be less data-driven. Remember the potential that lays within software and data in order to reach our climate targets. And here you see a picture of how Scania has been, over the past decade, working with collecting more data from our connected vehicles. But we also need more people to understand this and challenge ourselves, challenge our company to understand how do we make the most out of this data that we're collecting continuously.
Yes, data is crucial. And to make sure that we use the data for the right purpose, it is important to look ahead. Back in 2014, I had the privilege of a fantastic assignment where Henrik Henriksson, our former CEO, asked if I could gather a strategic cross-functional team to further develop the content into the Scania vision of becoming the leader in sustainable transport. So we did. We elaborated with very clever minds within Scania, but also outside of Scania, to understand what does it mean to be a sustainability leader, and what does it mean in the automotive industry. And these are three key findings, that basically in the automotive industry, it's about the system of transport, to optimize it. And basically it's about optimizing it on different levels. So optimizing the system as a whole, optimizing the distance, and optimizing the energy. And of course, making sure that it is renewable. And then make sure that we collaborate with those who want to achieve the same thing. So teaming up, we can't make it alone. And then have the courage, as we mentioned earlier, to really design the road. We are making the road as we move. So in that is also included challenging ourselves to set bold targets even before we know exactly how to reach them. And the economic circumstance for our business is that, yes, we are in a linear system today. It is the dominant economic system in the world, and it has some fundamental problems. And one of them is that it is, by definition, creating waste. And waste is really value, but it is in the wrong place. So what if we can put it in the right place? And within a linear system, we also quite often have a very narrow perspective on success. Within business, it's quite often how much stuff can we produce and how fast. And as a private person, it is about consumption, how much can I afford to consume. And of course, that's not valid for everyone, but it is thinking which is prevailing and which is, of course, being challenged. And that's a journey where we should all look at what could be alternatives to make sure that we have quality of life, but in a more smart way. But this system is fine-tuned, and it has been fine-tuned for more than 100 years, so it's super efficient. But if we continue like this, by 2050, we will overuse the Earth's capacity with 400%. So yes, it is unsustainable. It cannot sustain. But fortunately, as you may very well be aware of, there is a smarter alternative. And to be really sustainable as a system, a very interesting concept, which is not very often mentioned, is the notion of being regenerative. Can we design systems that are regenerative by design? This is, of course, a circular system, somewhat simplified, this one. But sort of on an overall level, it's basically about value and enabling business to prosper while decoupling the raw material extraction. So making people and business prosper, but in a much more sustainable way. And as a system, this system contains more value than the linear one in a total. It is distributed differently, but the total value is, in general, it is higher because value is not being wasted to the same amount. So, well, at least in theory, of course, it is very difficult, to not say impossible, to design a system where you don't lose any value at all. But the further we move in this direction, the more sustainable the system will become. And really, it is possible. We can just go out in the nearest forest. Nature is very circular, not to say completely circular. And in a turbulent world as ours, it is also stronger in points from the perspective of resilience. This system is more resilient. It is more complex, so that's the problem. It's quite often more local and it's more complex, so it needs a lot of clever brains to figure out how can we design this to make this possible. And combining manpower with data crunching, figuring out how to visualize systems to be able to optimize them is a key challenge for us. And what is really rewarding is that this system is enabling CO2 reductions, fundamentally, sort of step change improvements, but it is also enabling improvements when it comes to biodiversity impact. So it is a system that will help us from many angles. And to find these solutions, we need to put the most clever brains on the most important problems. And find solutions, find methods, principles, examples, scaling up pilots, etc., in this direction. And here's where diversity comes in, because we need a diverse set of perspectives to make these systems as well designed as possible. And really unprecedented collaboration, both within companies, of course, but also between companies, between industries, and also with academia and politicians. We need to team up to make it possible. And it's really about a mind shift as well, what terms do we use, especially what we measure, but really what we use, such as volume. How much do we focus on volume and how much on value? How much do we consider ourselves and our customers as consumers instead of users? And to what extent are we focusing on pushing out new hardware instead of repairing, upgrading the hardware, but really focusing on updating the software instead? But that's a mind shift, really. And how circular are we on a global perspective? Well, there are different ways to measure this, but one gap analysis that has been made came to the conclusion that the world in general today is about 8.6% circular. And about 3 weeks ago, we had a similar analysis of the Swedish situation, and looking at sort of how do we consume materials, food, sort of consumer goods, housing, but also mobility. And I kind of ask you to raise your hand if you think that the Swedish average is below this one. Anyone? Yeah. Well, yes, you're right. It is below, and it's quite far below. And of course, it depends on how you measure. But in this comparison, they came to the conclusion of 3.4%. So actually less than half of the global average.
And we should be as close to 100, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In theory, it is 100, exactly. And of course, we do have a very sort of high sustainability awareness in Sweden, but we are a very material-intense economy.
Would that be the same for basically the whole industrialized part of the world? So it's not only Sweden specifically, but it would be the same for US and
Yeah.
Norway?
Well, 8.6 would be as an average, yes.
Yeah, but 8.6 would be for every country in the world.
Yeah,
On any level.
yeah.
Please repeat. Is that the big reason for the difference, or?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, it is embracing, the 8.6 is embracing all countries. So no matter how much of welfare and sort of developed, how well developed is the country. Yeah. So that's the reason, of course. But at the same time, a well-developed country could challenge how we do things and how do we make sure that we have a good quality of life, but based on a different definition. So, yeah, it's surprising, but at the same time, it's showing us that we have a wonderful big potential here to improve. And how do we embrace this at Scania then? We gathered again cross-functionally in a strategic team to elaborate around what is circular economy for us. And we developed a model that we call Scania Circular Business. And this one, we realized that circularity is perfectly in line with what we stand for as a premium quality supplier, but also that we have sort of eliminate waste, we have a relentless focus on the customer, continuous improvements, etc. So we already have a lot of values, principles, and methods in line with circularity, not least within production. They have come very far, and they have been very much inspired by Japanese principles and methods to improve quality and optimizing. So really spreading those best practices across and making use of this model, we designed it with the design part in the heart of the model. That's where it starts. So that's where we set the prerequisites for the products, for the services, for the systems, etc. And it's basically to make sure that we design with the complete life cycle in mind, and preferably design for multiple life cycles. Then we also challenge what kind of materials we source and resource utilization, making sure that we use as much circular supplies, etc., but also avoiding hazardous substances as far as possible. And the third one is about product life extension. How do we help our customers or users to extend the life and make sure that the vehicle is running as long as possible? And of course, making use of data to really understand how are our products actually being used and how can we customize different solutions based on how that specific individual vehicle is actually being used. So we have many pools of excellence within this, and all three we can enable and of course improve. But the more we dare to challenge also the business models, the more leverage we will get from the first three. So the more we sort of dare to evaluate what would be best in each circumstance and move towards more of user-based business models. So ultimately it's about what do we measure and what do we celebrate. And back in 2019, Scania stopped all production, so more than 50,000 people stopped what they did in their normal job and went on a 1-hour education, but also a team dialogue on how can we learn about climate crisis, but also what can we do. And it was very much appreciated and enabled a lot of discussion and positive movement in the company. So Volkswagen got inspired by this initiative. So on World Earth Day this year, on the 22nd of April, they did a similar exercise, including 660,000 employees. And at Scania, for this year's Climate Day, we actually helped our employees to learn more about circular business and to enable action in line with this. All right, to make it a bit sort of concrete, what is also in these different parts of the value chain, we can also make it go through our activities using the 10 R's. And as you see, we love R's within Scania. This list is based on a Dutch model, where basically starting from the top, trying to keep as high up in this ladder as possible, then you keep the value up, ultimately. And basically daring to refuse. Do we really need this kind of solution? Rethink it. If we do need it, can we solve it in some other clever way, etc. And really avoiding recycling and incineration, because that's the last part. And basically, even if it's incineration with energy recovery, so burning with energy recovery, try to avoid the bottom part. So starting from the top. So what we've done, I'll show you some examples to make it more concrete. We have, for example, looked at packaging. And packaging is a really interesting topic, and it has been in the limelight when it comes to the consumer packaging for some time. And here we're talking about industry packaging. So within industry packaging, we have, we also have looked upon, this share of all the plastics sort of used ever or made ever. All of that, you see the share of packaging. And we have done quite a few different things to challenge how we use packaging within Scania. And we have basically challenged us with all of these sort of strategies and all of the 4 parts in the Scania business model. We do already have a rental set up internally, where the department where I work basically rent it from another department, but circulate it sort of internally as many times across the globe as possible, and challenging how many rotations can we make. And then, of course, making sure that we repair it and loop it back as far as possible, but also regarding the one-way packaging, sort of challenging what material we use. So one very concrete example when it comes to one-way packaging material is a solution we call honeycomb. And it's basically a solution for packaging windscreens. And here we have really taken a step back and looking at sort of the functionality we need. How can we solve it in the best way possible? And sort of rethinking the solution for it. And we've gone from 4 materials into 1, where we have been able to step change, reduce both the environmental footprint, but also the cost. And we have improved the ergonomics, and we have improved the weight and the lead time. So it's a win-win-win-win-win. So it's a nice example. And this was a pilot my brilliant colleagues at Parts Logistics started some years back. And now we can evaluate it and scale it, because that's where we're aiming. So scaling the good examples up to include more products. So one last example, but not least, is also that we have an assortment within Scania where we take spare parts which have been sort of returned to the Scania workshop. We bring it back into an industrial remanufacturing and then looping them back out to the customers with a quality as good as new or better, and with the same Scania warranties. So we already have quite a few products where we loop it and try to keep the value in the product up as far as possible. And also the clever thing here is that if we use the data to also evaluate when different components break, we can make preventative renewals. So we can exchange the product before it breaks, then it needs less repair So it's a really nice way of using data to improve for everyone, basically. Both the customer doesn't have to put it in a repair workshop, and also for Scania, of course. So here we make very good use of data, and this assortment we've been selling for quite some time, and we're talking about 2 million kilos of components we ship to remanufacturing every year. All right, so those were some sort of business examples, and I'm a very true believer that we can make the biggest difference as professionals. We should, of course, also try to embrace our values in our private life. And I'll just bring up a few examples from myself, because at our department we've used previously the 5 R's, and now they are 10, so they are slightly more difficult to remember now, but at the same time more useful. And I'll take a few examples from my own life, and for the first one, I'm being more and more inspired by minimalism, really being very sort of restrictive in what I put money on and what I sort of bring into my life in terms of stuff. And I've made, since the new year, I stopped buying things except for products where I need to sort of refill, so food and soap, etc. But also present I can buy, and also anything that can help me to shift towards a fossil-free life. So those 3 exceptions I make. But other than that, I really try to put my focus on other things that bring quality, rather than running around and picking up things in the house. So rather embracing simplicity. It's such a relief. So the refuse one is a favorite, but really also sort of using things differently. And I'll bring in sort of 2 examples, because I quite often use sort of clothing as ways of remembering these. So it was easier with 5 than 10. So I kind of use my clothes as symbols. I'll bring two examples. I have earrings here, and I got from Scania a gift many years back, which broke. And then I took the sort of a little detail from that item and made into earrings. So that's a kind of a repurpose one. And also I'll bring in the reuse. So basically the number 4, where these shoes, my grandmother bought these shoes back in 1950, and they were terribly expensive by then. But she's used them a lot, but she's used them with love. So not using them in rain, really using them for their proper purpose, but using them a lot. And then I inherited them, and I've been using them a lot. So now I expect, when I go to a shoe shop, the shoes should last at least 70 years. It's a bit difficult. That's why it's good also to not buy too much. It's difficult to find, but maybe further ahead we can find shoes and other things lasting for generations and really promoting quality. So yeah, that's an example.
I think we're running a little bit short on time,
okay.
So maybe we should skip. Yeah. So at Scania, we're very inspired by different Japanese models. Here's one of them, where you can find your true purpose of how you want to challenge the world, how you want to leave a better legacy behind. I could talk about this for hours and hours, but before you leave, I think we wanted to do a little exercise together with you where you could reflect on what you want to leave behind on this planet before you finish off your professional career. So
yeah, exactly. So it's really different for all of us, but it's a question if you have found your ikigai. Maybe some of you have, and some of you are still on the journey to find it, or started today. But we'll do something now that requires courage. We have been talking about courage. Now we'll try to use it. So it requires courage from us, but also from you. So basically what I would like to ask you is if you can be so kind and close your eyes for a while. And take a deep breath. And picture that you are on your way home after a celebration. The sun is warming your cheeks, and you still feel the taste of your favorite drink. You have been on a ceremony, a thank you and farewell party, because you are retiring today. People around you have been greeting you and thanking you for your efforts and your contribution. You feel the warmth of happiness and appreciation. What do you leave behind? What is your contribution? Please capture a few keywords that come to your mind. All right, thank you. And maybe you are on your path and you have framed your ikigai already, or maybe you start today.
So, let's go out there, challenge our systems, challenge the way of thinking, demand more from your surroundings, and we can only do this together. So thank you for listening today.
Thank you.